Hi everybody, and on this beautiful October morning, you find me in the lovely town of Buckingham, in Buckinghamshire, England, where if you listen to my podcast, Murder at Bedtime with Lyndon, or the YouTube channel of the same name, you will know that I promised to do my last episode, The Terrible Murder of Annie Leeson, with a walkthrough of the places where it actually happened, because they're all still here. Now, the 1864 murder of Annie Leeson is probably Buckingham's worst murder and most well-known one. Annie was a beautiful 17-year-old girl who worked in the village just down the road here at Mr. Uff's shop. Now, her mother and her elder sister lived down Nelson Street in a place called Norton Place, which was next door to a house that was owned by Robert Stevens and his wife and their son William Stevens, 24-year-old tailor from the town, who had been in London for 2 years and had apparently got in with the wrong crowd and became a different person to the person that went away. Anyway, when he came back, he got an unhealthy obsession with 17-year-old Annie, and he started to pursue her. Now, for those people who haven't watched or listened to the Murder at Bedtime episodes, I think I'd better fill you in on the story first. Annie did not share the same feelings as Bill had towards her, and she had told her friends this, but she was still polite and friendly towards him. Bill's friends tried to tell him that Annie was not interested in him in a romantic way, but this just made him more jealous that she was talking to his friends and colleagues. He even told her he would blow his brains out if she married someone else. He then decided on Valentine's Day in February 1864 to take it to another level by buying Annie 2 expensive Valentine cards, from which he received no reaction from her. But maybe if the Valentine was anonymous like it should be, she didn't know who it was from, or if she did, she didn't know how to react to the cards. Remember, she had no feelings towards him of a romantic nature. To make things worse, someone sent Bill an offensive Valentine card, which sent him storming round to James Uff's shop in a rage, demanding to know who bought the card. Mr. Uff told him he had no idea where the card came from, but it wasn't from his shop, and when confronted, Annie vehemently denied it was sent by herself. By this time, Bill seems to be spiralling into depression and anger over his unrequited love of Annie Leeson. He would go out drinking with his friend and work colleague John Billing and tell him how his mind was tortured and his life in ruins. John knew that Bill had taken to carrying a cutthroat razor, told him he would cut Annie's throat if she did not return his affections, and it was only the law stopping him from doing so. His father Robert was so worried about his son's state of mind that he had confiscated and hidden the razor, but Bill either found it or acquired another. Even Annie and her sister Elizabeth both knew he carried a razor, but Annie didn't seem to have a clue to the danger she was in, thinking it more likely that he would use it on himself than on her. So what was the catalyst for Bill Stevens to finally snap? Well, it would seem that something happened on the evening of Sunday the 21st of February when Annie arrived at her mother's house and very angrily exclaimed that Bill had acted improperly toward her. Spoiler alert, we never do find out what he did. Anyway, she said she would never walk with him again. The rejection presumably had a very bad effect on Bill. We don't know what exactly was going on in his troubled mind, but now, on top of everything else, the love of his life was now no longer speaking to him. It was probably now he could feel her slipping out of his imaginary grasp, and decided if he couldn't have her, nobody else would. So let's now go to Nelson Street and see how this tragic day unfolded. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you down Nelson Street and show you all the important places where this crime took part. I'm actually going to do a voiceover of the places because it's a very busy road, the traffic's very loud, but hopefully it will come out all right and you will see the places where this all happened and are still here to this day. So let's go on a journey down Nelson Street and see what happened to 17-year-old Annie Leeson and 24-year-old William Stevens. It was at this shop, now Nelson Local, but at this time owned by Mr. Uff, that approximately 6 p.m. on the 27th of February 1864, Annie Leeson left the shop with an empty bucket to walk down Nelson Street to the water pump on Hunter Street. She had decided to call in on her mother and sister on the way back. She crossed Tinswick Road and continued walking up Nelson Street. The house on the right with the red door was at the time a shop owned by a Mrs. Spicer, which assumes more importance later on in the story. Annie carries on walking down Nelson Street. She's now approaching the Stevens house with the purple door. And then we take a look down Norton Place. As you can see, there is the door to Annie's mother and sister's house on the left. She doesn't even pause here at the time, but carries on walking down to Hunter Street and the water pump. At the water pump, she fills up her bucket, she turns around and returns back down Nelson Street. As Annie approaches her mother's house with the red door on the left, everything is witnessed by an 11-year-old lad called Richard Woodhouse, who was playing near the water pump. Annie goes into the passageway, leaves the pail of water outside the door, and enters the house to speak to her mother and sister for about 5 minutes before coming out, picking up the bucket and continuing her walk back to Mr. Uff's. It was then, according to young Ian, that a man came running out of the passageway and ran towards Annie. He said something to her outside the house with the red door, which was at the time Mrs. Spicer's shop. She did not reply, so the man grabbed hold of her, got her in a headlock and drew his razor twice across her throat. Annie was terribly wounded. The cuts were so deep that they nearly decapitated her, and she had to hold her head upright with her hands as she ran. She burst into Mr. Uff's and he caught her as she collapsed into his arms. He shouted for someone to go and fetch the doctor, but as she lay on the floor, Mr. Uff cradling her head and trying to staunch the blood with a towel, poor Annie died. Meanwhile, the wretched Stevens turned and ran back to his own house. As he reached the passageway, he raised the blood-soaked razor to his own throat, made 2 gaping wounds, and collapsed to the floor. Dr. Death? No, I kid you not. Not Diath, Death. Arrives on his horse, too late to save Annie at Mr. Uff's, but is pointed up to Norton Place, where he miraculously saves the life of Bill Stevens. He was so badly injured that he had to stay under house arrest in his own bed for 5 weeks with a 24-hour guard to stop him pulling out his stitches until he was incarcerated here in Buckingham Jail awaiting his trial in Aylesbury. This is the courthouse in Aylesbury Market Square, where Stephen's trial did not start until the 18th of July 1864 due to Bill Stephen's severe injuries. Plus, he had been refusing food and drinking only water, which some reports say seeped out through his wounded throat. He was very pale and looked thin and unwell, and was given a seat to sit on in the dock. A blue neckerchief covered his wounds. Bill pleaded not guilty to willful murder, but he was on a hiding to nothing. The evidence was overwhelming, especially the voluntary statement that he made to Police Superintendent William Giles, in which he said, quote, "Oh, Mr. Giles, that scaffold at Aylesbury, am I to be buried in a prison, to die there and be buried in the jail yard and be covered up with hot lime? I cannot. Let me die on the bed as I am. I wish Dr. Death had been out at the time, and then I should have been dead, and I should now be in heaven with my dear Annie. How could I do it? How could I do it? But I did." Police Constable Humphrey Ray testified that while he watched over Stevens, in case he should try to harm himself, he heard the accused say, "Quite how could I do it? I wish she was alive and I was dead." He also stated when asked, why did he do it? And he replied, quote, "Against Mrs. Spicer's, I spoke as civil to her as a man could speak, but she would not speak to me, but swung about, and then I did it." Mr. Payne for the defence did a sterling job trying to get the jury to decide this was not premeditated murder, but a spur-of-the-moment decision by a tormented, rejected, lovesick young man. Unfortunately for Bill Stevens, the judge, Baron Martin, was having none of it. In his summing up, he told the jury they should not return a verdict of manslaughter. No man had the right to destroy a woman simply for denying his advances. The jury took 13 minutes to find Bill guilty of willful murder, and he was sentenced to hang. Bill Stevens didn't mind dying for his crime, but he was terrified of being hanged. Behind me is Aylesbury Prison, where on the 5th of August 1864, William Stevens was hung above the archway in the main gate for the murder of Annie Leeson. He died hard, slow strangulation. It took about 5 minutes for him to stop moving. He was then left for an hour before he was cut down, buried in the prison grounds with quicklime, and as far as we know, that's where he still is today. His worst fears confirmed. Well, what did you think of that? I think today, in this day and age, William Stevens may have got his manslaughter charge, and with good behaviour he could have been out in 10 years, but I think public demand meant that he was going to face his executioner. But anyway, if you did enjoy this video, I know it's a different one for a change, actually walking through somewhere where I've done a story on already. If you would like to give it a like and subscribe and ding the little bell just for further notifications, it really does make a difference to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. So with that, thank you for watching this, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you very much indeed. I just thought I'd better prove that I'm not on my own today, and actually Lynn is here.
Hi.
Hi Lynn, good morning. So we came to Buckingham this morning. You are modelling the actual
yellow
exiled yellow belly.
Yes, I have it here.
Hoodie today, aren't you?
Yes,
Which
I am.
is very, very nice.
Yeah.
We've got one each. Mine's
Yes.
actually in the wash, just goes to show I don't wear wear things all the time and never wash them. Anyway, we're in Buckingham where it's October. It's fantastic. It's going to be 24 degrees today, and we've just been. Where did we just go for our breakfast?
Was it the King's Head or?
The King's Head, yeah. Yeah, which was absolutely amazing, and probably one of the best breakfasts that we've had.
I would say so.
For a long time.
Definitely.
And very nice people. So anyway, we are outside Buckingham Jail at the moment, where William Stevens was incarcerated. No, he wasn't incarcerated. He was indeed incarcerated for the time before he was moved to Aylesbury prison on remand, awaiting trial at the Aylesbury Assizes at the courthouse in Market Square. So we will now move on there.